Ladies and gentlemen, we're starting the event. Let me tell you that we're also having online participants with us. So I'm welcoming also our participants joining us from afar, and in a public session, the event is also web streamed just for your information. Dear Deputy High Commissioner, Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to welcome you here on this, I would say, spring day at Villa Moigné here at the Geneva Academy to this event jointly organized with GEQUAL, the University of Bern, the Swiss National Science Foundation, and the World Trade Institute, and us here at the Geneva Academy. As you see, I am not Professor Gaggioli. My name is Felix Kirchmeier. I'm Executive Director of the Geneva Human Rights Platform here at the Academy, and replacing my director, who sends her greetings and regrets for not being able to join us here today. As you all know, the United Nations Committee on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women has set out working on a new general recommendation, so on the equal and inclusive representation of women in decision-making. Following the half day of a general discussion that the committee organized yesterday, this event today will highlight the importance of the process initiated by the committee and address key issues related to equal and inclusive representation of women in decision-making systems. This event is very welcome at the Geneva Academy, at a place where decision-making is predominantly in female hands, if I may add. I think it links also very well with our work in the Geneva Human Rights Platform, where we work closely with all treaty bodies, but also, of course, in particular with the CEDAW Committee. We work actually on the functioning of the treaty bodies, on enhancing cooperation among them, outreach, and in particular their impact. And what else would a general recommendation aim but strengthening the impact of the convention of the committee in the national contexts. Just the other week, actually, we had in this very room an informal meeting between members of the Committee of the Rights of the Child and CEDAW to discuss common positions. And some days prior to that, we had an event on the inclusion of children in the work of the UN Human Rights Mechanism with speakers from youth parliaments and more than 40 youth representatives in the room. And this is a topic I would like to just stress ahead of today's discussion. It's a topic brought up by almost all speakers in the opening of the day of general discussion yesterday. It was the importance of young generations, as you, Nicole, put it. The representative of the Human Rights Committee yesterday also said that gender parity is a process, and starting at birth and continuing throughout life. The president of the IPU mentioned that rejuvenating democracy serves the promotion of gender equality. And of course, the chair of the CRC, Mrs. Mikoko Otani, spoke on girls' participation as the need for a true intersectional approach. So I hope this aspect will be remaining visible throughout the preparation of the new general comment, emphasizing this process nature while avoiding the achieving gender parity taking some 100 years, as also mentioned. I think it was a representative from UN Women yesterday when just looking at the pace of today. And also, as mirrored in the statement by some delegations yesterday, I think indirectly when they were speaking of the respect of traditions and norms in respective societies. Today I saw also it is quite a special day. 23rd of February initially was International Women's Day by accident of different calendars between the Julian and Gregorian calendar. So actually this event is very well placed today on what in the early 1900s was observed as International Women's Day. So happy International Women's Day in that regard also. With this, I would like to hand over actually to the Deputy High Commissioner, Nada Al-Nashif, for her opening remarks. Nada, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Felix. It's a pleasure to be here. Any excuse to walk out into the park, certainly from Kelly Wilson, but wonderful to be here on what I think is a really important and possibly seminal, I think, launch. Let me first thank GEQUAL, the University of Bern, the Swiss National Science Foundation, the World Trade Institute, and the Geneva Academy for this first follow-up event to what was, as Felix gave us some highlights, a very productive half day of general discussion yesterday. As we heard yesterday, and I think there was a rich array of perspectives, women continue to be starkly underrepresented everywhere in decision-making systems, including especially the highest positions of power in national parliaments, in industry, in the financial sector, in technology, of course. And we have not yet achieved gender parity in the membership of the UN Human Rights Treaty bodies. Obviously, we're working very hard on the staff complement of the United Nations as a whole, in addition, especially at higher levels, I must say, and we are making some progress. The Secretary General is determined. But all of that shows why it is so important that the next general recommendation of CEDAW will cover this aspect of decision-making in all spheres of life. Obviously, the figures that you all, as experts, know very well and deal with, particularly reported by UN Women and the IPU, are sobering. They show clearly how little influence women have had on decisions, including those that impact mostly women, in fact. And despite repeated and long-standing commitments by the international community, progress remains slow, and I think that representation remains tokenistic. According to a report by UN Women and UNDP of last year, women have been, quote, largely left out in pandemic decision-making spaces around the world. I think this was one of the most major findings of the COVID-19 assessments and lessons learned. Many vulnerable groups, of course, were further marginalized, but I think the problem is now that state action remains lagging behind with the commitments to build back better after the COVID-19 and all that we have learned from it. Just last Monday, the 20th, the UN celebrated, another celebration, the World Day of Social Justice. And I think it was underlined again there that poverty and inequalities, both within and among countries, remain very much on the rise in many parts of the world. The economic and social crises recently have been exacerbated by COVID-19, by natural disasters due to accelerating climate change, geopolitical tensions, and armed conflicts. And I think we were not really on track for the SDGs. We are even further off track now, and obviously we are midway, and we need to think about what we're going to do to try to make this right. But obviously these major challenges and your ongoing reflections, it's high time to end exclusion of women and to make equal representation a reality. Obviously, we need a truly enabling environment, and quotas are an important first step. According to UN Women, again, more than 2/3 of countries where women's representation in parliament is 40% or higher have applied gender quotas. We know that they can enable women to overcome some of the structural barriers that exclude. Sometimes they are interim, temporary measures. But we've seen what a difference they make in mindset and simply breaking the stereotype of the ability to stand and succeed and remain in parliament. However, obviously, quota systems are not an end in themselves, but part of a larger process that requires structural change. And again, the overcoming of stereotypes, confining women to traditional caretaking roles, despite the fact that they do so much more, means that we need real choices backed up by tangible pathways of career development as well. Most importantly, we need to ensure that education is free from gender bias so that every boy and every girl can imagine differently, including the possibility of achieving anything. And I think this was one of the most dangerous consequences of COVID-19, what has happened to education. The number of women and girls, particularly, who have been deprived of education and who actually will probably not go back to it anytime soon. And I think the digital divide has really been exposed, particularly for women, young girls in the global south. So obviously, the next thing is the particular importance of ensuring gender parity in digital transformations, including artificial intelligence. We're just chatting, Caitlin and I. Artificial intelligence, if human rights-based and gender responsive, presents great opportunities for humanity. But we know, actually, on some new research from Concordia University, women's representation in the development of AI is only 27%. And I think that's hugely uneven, probably, across spheres and countries and domains. Yeah. So according to a 2020 analysis by the Berkeley Haas Center of 133 AI systems across industries, for example, 44% demonstrate gender bias, of which 25.7% demonstrate both gender and racial bias. And I think this compounded intersectionality is very important. Of the systems demonstrating gender bias, 70% led to lower service quality for women and non-binary individuals. And I think how these systems become blind at some point is very important. So in view of, we have been certainly much more engaged. The High Commissioner has made several recent statements on the potential worries, the concerns that exist with artificial intelligence gaining ground. We really need to make sure that it addresses both women's and men's needs, and that women are represented in equal numbers, at least among its developers. Again, we were just saying, I am optimistic, especially when I see the high interest that CEDAW's future general recommendation already generates now. I think it's really important, if we want to come up with some guidance that will be taken up, that will have practical implications, that will be accessible and usable to our constituents, that we really invest in this process of dialogue and consultation to make sure that we understand where some of the red lines may be, where some of the most vulnerable communities can be brought on board. And in that sense, I really thank everyone who's been organizing, for giving this additional push, this additional impetus to the debate, and to the Geneva Academy as always for hosting us, and hope that we will come out on a very positive note at the end. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Deputy High Commissioner. Thank you for your opening remarks and those very pertinent points. Really looking forward to what that document, what that general recommendation can possibly achieve, and its importance in the setting. Let me hand over now to the moderator of today's debate, Professor Elisa Fornale, professor at the World Trade Institute at the University of Bern. Elisa, please.
Thank you. Good afternoon to everyone who's joining us today in person and also online. It's really a great pleasure for me to be here, to welcome you all. And first of all, I would like to really express my deepest thank you to the GQual campaign and all the members who are there, because they're doing, I think, an amazing job, and I would like to recognize that. And also to the Geneva Academy, because for hosting us and for being so active in the co-organization of this very tiny event. As I said, I am really pleased to introduce and to moderate this panelist session, because first of all, I think we have a unique opportunity to have a reflection from a wonderful panel of experts. And you can see all with us today. So Dr. Nicola Melin, Professor Claudia Martin, Ambassador Claudia Fuentes, Julio Santiago Canton, and Caitlin Kraft Buchman, sorry. So what is very important that they will bring a diverse perspective, and this will ensure a dynamic debate. And most importantly, I think this will offer us a unique opportunity to identify concrete priorities and also recommendations for the achievement of women equal participation in critical leadership and decision-making roles. So I will start immediately, because I think it's a great honor to introduce you our first panelist, Dr. Nicola Melin, who is not only one of the expert members of the CEDAW Committee, but now is the chair of this very important working group on the equal and inclusive representation of women in decision-making system. So I would like to invite Nicola to illustrate the work, the important work that the CEDAW Committee started to do on the development of this new general recommendation, and to share with us what are the key substantive, institutional, and structural challenges that you see also the general recommendation and the CEDAW Committee will try to address to really ensure meaningful impact in practice. So thank you again.
Thank you very much. I asked how much time I have. we are eager for this work. But first of all, I apologize for my late, because we are in a rush at the end of the session. But it's a great pleasure to be at the heart of this very brilliant panel, and here in the Geneva Academy. And I just would like to start by congratulations to you for GQual, because you really make a wonderful job. And I'm very happy to be here with you the day after the half-day discussion, because it's a great signal, and I'm sure that we have a very strong partnership in this work, and I'm very, very happy. Your research, your proposal are very constructive on this issue. I just want to start on the three paradox. The issue about women participation in public life or political life is a consensual issue. From the start, from the Conference of Mexico, from the Beijing platform, and it has been confirmed, of course, through the Articles 7 and 8 of the CEDAW Convention, but also for the SDGs and the Resolution 1325, everywhere. And the paradox is that the result is not so good. It's staying very, very weak, and only 25% of parliamentarians are women today. It means that women are still excluded from the decision-making process. And the second paradox is that it is a universal right, but in the meantime, we see that it is more and more linked to local elections, to local evolution. So we have a sort of random evolution, and more, we note, we observe that women's rights are not consolidated enough to resist crisis today. And the impact of public crisis has also been very strong on this issue. And third, some people consider that maybe discriminations are behind us. But as you said perfectly, with AI, we see that maybe we have the most important discriminations before us, right? Because we see that the gender bias are really a risk. But in the meantime, we have to take the positive part of AI. And I think that the general recommendation has the aim to reconsider the models of governance, and we can take advantage of this new collective intelligence, the networks, the new form of governance that we can consider from the AI experience for the time. And the general recommendation, as you noted, has a big ambition. The idea is to change the paradigm, to give a new and historic impetus to equal and inclusive representation of women in all forms of decision-making processes. And for that, we have decided to consolidate the leadership between IPU, CEDAW, UN Women, the Committee on Human Rights, rights of child, but also of people, disabled people. And we have also decided to create a strong link with the Forum Generation Equality. We consider that we have to keep in mind a systemic approach. It's not only to identify some new measures to increase the part of women in this system. We have to start from the system and to deconstruct, if I can use this word, the barriers, the vision of this public political sphere, but also the highest positions in economic sector, and to create, as you said, an enabling environment, but also a new vision of governance. I'm political. I've spent 28 years in parliament and government and of embassy. And I know that the system for the time is not open. Some women can be pioneers, can be a good example, but globally the system is not really open for women because I think that it is the design of the power is something very vertical, maybe also with a sort of rigid approach. And we note a lot of violences, a lot of cultural barriers, a lot of stereotypes that prevent women to enter into this sphere. So we have to deconstruct and to debate. And I think that the exercise is very, very ambitious because we have to consider that promoting women in these spheres is not only an obligation, it's not only a fundamental right, it is an investment, a sort of capacity to respond the challenge we are facing today. And when you consider these challenges, climate change, migrations, digital transition, but also agriculture, poverty, extremism, you consider immediately that women are really to be part of the decision, not only for themselves, not only to accelerate the implementation of the other rights, of the other women's rights, but just to be in phase with our current challenges and to be part of the world. You know, for me, we have to leave this attitude consisting to demand rights. We are now to decide, once again, for ourselves as well as for the world. And it is the challenge of this general recommendation. It's a new vision of the world for a capacity of decision, a new capacity of decision. And I think that on this point, it's a sort of historic step. Three keywords. First, acceleration. We have considered that we need to get results for 2030. If I can resume, I use the sentence of the General Secretary saying we have to move from a cause to a norm. And by 2030, I add this point, because with SDGs, it can be a sort of turning point. And if we don't reach the goal at this time, I don't see how we can do later. Secondly, innovation. I think that we have to be resolutely on new concepts of governance. It's the reason why we have decided to integrate private sector, not only to take them abroad, but to take the good experiences, and especially on AI. And third, mobilization, because I think that this topic can be a new way to consolidate the CEDAW Committee, to create really very solid and positive links with state parties. And we have seen yesterday that 30 state parties were here, sorry. And it has been a very important participation, very symbolic. And we are also to be resolutely turned to young generations, because this recommendation has the aim to be the new roadmap for the 20 next years. And we are really to be in line with this, with the expectations, and it seems totally normal. And of course, with civil society, because we need this exchange so rich for us. And to conclude, I would like to say that I have in mind 3 E's. First, educate. We have to educate women and men, NGOs, states, everybody, to the new vision of governance. And we have to start, as I said, from education for girls, because we can imagine to create, for instance, an education for empowerment for girls and boys. But it's true that the leadership, the capacity to imagine that you are totally in capacity to decide for the world, for your country, for the planet, for yourselves, is not absolutely obvious for young girls. So we are really to push that. We have also to focus on stereotypes because it's so important to fight against some pressure, some social pressures that are very, very, very negative still for girls. And also we have to educate state parties, educate, I take this word with a sort of subtle manner but it's true that sometimes the states consider that they have to increase the participation of women, but not. The question is to share the responsibilities. It's not the same point of view. And I think that we are really to push with some of them, which are very, very conscious and very aware about that, to change the mentality, the mindset, and educate, empower, and empower. I would like to use this general recommendation to create a new impetus, a new consolidation, but a new consolidation of women's rights in all parts of the CEDAW Convention, because of course, more women are in capacity to decide, more they can play a crucial role to advance their own rights. And it's true that we need a so big acceleration in this regard that it can be also a way to get a better world for women. And at least I would like to say that I'm fighting with a very strong determination for this recommendation. I'm very happy to see this success at this time, but I think that we cannot fail, because it would be really impossible to imagine this sort of pushback, because there is a momentum today. If we don't use this, maybe this magic time, magic possibility to change this paradigm, I don't imagine that we can find another opportunity, because progress is not guaranteed. And you know, all over the world, women are remaining the victims of all sorts of violences and discriminations today, while in the meantime, they are the drivers of change. So we have really to adapt these two paradigms and to make really this step with you. And I need you, I count on you, because this mobilization is a part of the success.
Thank you a lot for this super rich introduction, and also for sharing so many important issues that will be part of your vision for changing also the paradigm. Thank you a lot. I would like now to introduce Professor Claudia Martin, who is the co-director of the Academy of Human Rights and Humanitarian Law at the American University in Washington College of Law. But the most important, as we have already said, she's the co-founder of the GQual campaign, and I think I would like to ask you now to share a little bit more your work, also some insight, in particular about the important achievement that you contributed to get in 2021, when you contributed to the adoption of the report by the UN Human Rights Council Advisory Committee on current level of representation of women in human rights organs and mechanisms. And so in line with that, I would like to ask you to provide us an overview of the most important recommendation, how we can also link with the work that the CEDAW Committee will also advance with the adoption of the new general recommendation. So I think that's all. Thank you a lot.
Thank you very much. And I'm here with my colleagues. I want to acknowledge all my colleagues from the GQual campaign who are here in Geneva this week to participate of the different activities organized by CEDAW regarding the new general recommendation. For those of you, I want to thank the Geneva Academy, our partners. We are the partners in Washington. We are our partners here in Geneva. and all the other institutions who have been co-sponsoring this event, and of course all the panelists. To start, I would like to say that for those of you who don't know anything about GEQUAL, GEQUAL is a campaign that we launched to seek for gender parity in the composition of international tribunals and bodies, organs in general. We understood at the time, this campaign was launched in 2015, we understood at the time that there was underrepresentation of women in the composition of these organs and that we had to do something. I think we never expected that we were going to inspire so many other groups to argue for gender parity in other decision-making bodies. So we are really very proud that we have been part of this discussion. True, we work with the Human Rights Council and the Advisory Committee to the Human Rights Council to produce a report on current underrepresentation of women in international organs and tribunals. The report was published in 2021. This is an amazing report, maps out pretty much what I'm trying to describe here. But I also want to say that we always believe that the CEDAW Committee has had the most important role, because the CEDAW Convention has Article 8, and Article 8 is the only provision in international law in general that provides for equal representation of women at the international sphere. So we always trusted that, we always believe that Article 8 is the stepping stone into ensuring women equal representation in international decision making. And so we believe that the CEDAW Committee is in a unique position to define the scope of this provision. So we're extremely happy that Nicole, that you and your colleagues have decided to take up this amazing challenge, because we do believe that it will be a change and shift in paradigm, as you indicated. I want to briefly say a little bit of what we have, what was included in the report, but also what we have been advocating for regarding the interpretation of Article 8, that we believe again is crucial for our campaign and for seeking gender parity in the representation of women in international bodies and tribunals. We have, first of all, the CEDAW Committee has indeed been interpreted somewhat Article 8, but the interpretation of the committee has been mostly focusing on Article 7, that refers to political participation. It makes sense, it's so important, it's such a crucial matter for women at the domestic level to be involved in Congress to change laws and to change practices. And so in some ways, Article 8 has not been so much interpreted. So again, we believe that this is the opportunity for that article to be provided live and content. So in the campaign has advocated for two important things. Number one, that this provision clearly establishes a right of women to be equally represented, to be represented on equal terms in the work of international organizations. So we are very, very pleased that the CEDAW's concept note for this general recommendation speaks and acknowledges women's equal representation in decision-making as a human right. We believe that this is very important because, as Nicole mentioned, we are going to be moving away from the idea of claiming participation to be indeed actors and to claim representation. That it's a big shift, as Nicole mentioned, and we completely agree. At the same time, by understanding this as a right, also brings into all the debate on equal rights and non-discrimination that has been interpreted by other human rights bodies. The other aspect of our advocacy refers to our understanding that state parties under Article 8 have a duty to ensure gender equality in women's access to positions in international organs and tribunals, and that this duty is twofold. Number one, there is an obligation at the domestic level, and the way to implement that obligation is by creating and establishing transparent selection and nomination processes where women can have access and can be assessed on the basis of objective criteria to be nominated for international positions. But of course, that would be, if we only stay there, we will only restrict ourselves to formal equality. And as the CEDAW Committee has said, formal equality is not enough. So we do believe that to achieve substantive equality, that selection process needs to take gender into account. So we claim that if there is any procedure at the domestic level for nomination of women for international positions, they should take gender into account. Also, we believe that it has to be a component of transformative equality, because I think that we had this conversation with Nicole. Otherwise, women do get nominated to silo positions, those that refer to women's rights. And so we, if there is a topic where women are associated with, our duty of care or, women's rights, children, but never to the positions, where the power is divided. And so we believe that by claiming this transformational equality, we also will achieve that women will be equally represented in issues and discussions on peace, war, trade, and international law in general. We also believe that as part of the obligations, the states should ensure equal representation at the international level. And for that, states must influence when the rules regulating processes of appointment in tribunals or other organs are adopted. There are constantly new treaties being adopted, and whenever they incorporate the rules on selection and composition of the bodies that will oversee the treaty, they don't include equal gender representation. Most recently, there are two treaties, human rights treaties, that do it: the Convention on Forced Disappearances and the CRPD, the Convention on the Human Rights of Persons with Disabilities. But we think that this needs to be a must in any future treaty. Women and gender parity need to be incorporated as one of the conditions of the composition of the treaty that will oversee the functioning of the particular instrument. Also, we believe that, and we have been trying to discuss that in Geneva, that we understand that at the international level, when selecting women or selecting members for international bodies or tribunals, there's a swap involved. And we understand that, we are not naive, but we do believe that even in that context, gender can be taken into account as well. And so we have been meeting with some of our colleagues from the missions here in Geneva, and we have been doing this work at the regional level as well to try to convince them that they need to start thinking in that regard as well, how to incorporate gender, to take gender into account whenever they select new members for the international bodies or tribunals. Another important thing is that Article 8 speaks about establishes that the states must take appropriate measures. We believe that this notion needs to be integrated in light of Article 4. I'm very glad that Nicole also mentions this need to take special measures to accelerate substantive equality for women. Of course, the committee has acknowledged and identified some measures, but we agree with Nada and with Nicole that this needs to be translated into quotas, and that we shouldn't be ashamed of claiming that. I think that that's the way to accelerate substantive equality. Another important aspect that we have claimed and that we believe the committee should affirm is that when we speak about equal terms, we refer to gender parity, which means 50-50. There are a lot of, I think there are a lot of phrases, there are a lot of debates, but not everybody wants to say it. And I think that the committee should make that clear. It's true that the Beijing Declaration and the Platform Faction, the Working Group of Discrimination, the Advisory Committee, they have all referred to 50-50, but not the CEDAW Committee yet. So we hope that you will take that opportunity to make it very clear. Finally, we agree that by making this general recommendation a broad understanding of what equal representation in decision-making means, will articulate an interpretation that will guide not only states, but also the other human rights bodies and the other international tribunals that need to decide on and monitor the right of equal representation of women. And the final call that we ask is that the committee doesn't stop at articulating the interpretation of Article 8, but also monitors compliance by states by asking the right questions each time that the states appear before the committee to present their general reports. I think that you can find most of what I said in our written submission that has been done with all my colleagues. I want to acknowledge the work of, I'm here, I think because we are in an academic institution and I'm the professor, but I want to acknowledge that all these ideas and the written submissions have been done in cooperation with all my colleagues from Chile. Thank you very much.
Thank you a lot, Erika, for all the work done and all the work that you will continue to do. Thank you a lot. So I would like now to introduce the ambassador, Claudio Fuentes Julio, who is the new permanent representative of Chile to the United Nations here in Geneva since the last year. And now I think with this talk, we will have also the opportunity to address maybe another point that is crucial also for the context of the new general recommendation, because I think coming from a region with a strong feminist movement, I would like to ask you really to try to provide us an insight of the key challenges that today persist on how implemented a feminist foreign policies, that this also could play a crucial role for ensuring equal representation of women, and then also to turn to the question of what efforts and commitment member states are required to do, to take to make really women inclusive representation in decision-making processes. So I think thank you a lot.
Thank you, Elisa, and thanks for the invitation to the Geneva Academy, of course, to GEQUAL, and with this actually such nice setting this morning. So let me start by saying that we for some reason what I was going to say today is written in Spanish, so I will so I will improvise a little bit, which might be a little bit more fun. So having said that, part of the questions relate to the strong feminist movements in Latin America. So let me start with that. I think my region, Latin America, is probably a region in which the feminist movement has been the strongest. If it were not for them, we wouldn't have been able to vote, we wouldn't have been able to discuss issues related to reproductive rights, we wouldn't have been able basically to be sitting here today. And they remain very strong. They have been on different issues across the region. So this is why I believe, and they work very closely with the states in some cases, in others a little less. But I think when it comes to foreign policy, and especially my country, believes that it's important. There is a need to work closely with civil society organizations, in particular the ones that are promoting gender equality. This is why a little bit inspired my presence here, and we are committed to continue working with them very closely. Trying to answer your question. So first thing, I was thinking one of the first questions that a feminist in international relations asked. Her name is Cynthia Enloe. I hope many of you have read her work because it's really wonderful, and she was able to shake, you know, the traditional visions of international relations as we understood them until the late 80s. And then she was the initiator of a huge discussions about gender and how we understood gender for international relations specialists. So her question was, where are the women? So I think this is a good question always to start with. And in the case of foreign policy in particular, which is my question, I think that we don't know so much where are the women. So there remains to be an important work related to empirical data and to understand the presence, the role of women in diplomacy, in multilateral institutions, in negotiation process as well. We don't know much, especially when it comes to related to peace. So first, let me start by welcoming the work of GEQUAL in this regard. I think this is something that actually governments will use your data. We use your data to make arguments within our bureaucracies in order to promote certain ideas and recommendations internationally. Well, we need more of that, particularly when it comes to foreign policy and the role of women in foreign policy, especially in comparative terms. So there is very little that we know in terms of how different bureaucracies, state bureaucracies and our foreign ministries are going and in terms of foreign policy promoting gender equality inside our ministries. And this is something that we really need to understand where are the women in which positions, in what roles, and how long it takes them, in their careers, and what are the difficulties to get there in their careers within the bureaucracy. Why this matters? Because if we want further representation internationally, we need to change our bureaucracies domestically. Who presents the women in this international institution? Well, our countries, mi Cancillería, my bureaucracies. So if there are not women inside our bureaucracies, of course, it will be hard actually to present candidates internationally. So we really need to focus a little bit more on what countries are doing. And of course, I pretty much welcome the fact that many countries, and countries also from Latin America, are promoting this notion of feminist foreign policy as a core principle and values of foreign policy. Chile is one of them. So President Boric declared that the government as a whole is actually a feminist government, and therefore it makes sense to have a feminist foreign policy as well. It's something relatively, despite the fact that Chile has been working on gender equality for a while, having that label has to mean something, and we are actually working on having a policy specifically on that. Why this matters, and I always read some data, because, for example, when we deal with issues related to negotiation process, peace negotiation process in the world, between 1992 and 2011, only 9% of the negotiators were women. How many do you think are the ones signing the accords when it comes to peace process? 96% were men. So this is an area in particular that, as we have been studying, that there is a resolution 1325, which is more than 20 years ago, which is specifically about women in negotiation process to be active participants in peace building, but it is really an area which is lying quite behind. There are different numbers, but women ambassadors in the world, in general, as an average, they are not more than 15% ambassadors in the world, which means that there are very few faces internationally that we can see on a daily basis as portraying this issue. This is something that, as all the previous speakers have emphasized, needs to be changed. So that's one thing. We need better, my first point, better data, better information, a better mapping of what's going on in terms of women inside all the foreign ministries. The second, I think we have important structural challenges, and I would say the challenge of institutionalization of feminist foreign policies, for one, or foreign policies that have a really a strong promotion of gender equality. What does this mean? I think is actually to go beyond, because I think in general we tend to be very good in having labels. We are a feminist foreign policy, but this means really institutionalizing that. That means creating a particular unit, probably a very high unit within our ministries, which deals with gender equality, and we will make changes inside the bureaucracy, and which will think systematically in terms of what are going to be our foreign policies multilaterally and abroad. It means also to really understand what have been the traditional institutions, norms, practices that relate to gender in our ministries. It means to look, for example, at formal and informal discrimination within our ministries. It means to look at the cultural patriarchal organizations that we have inside our Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and all the difficulties that many women face to reconcile work as long as with their family. So it means that it's all these difficult questions inside the foreign ministry that are not easy to answer for many of us. So I think this notion of institutionalization is key. Institutionalization also means that we need to have a gender perspective in all the areas that relates to foreign policy. Not just remain about gender. We need to have a gender perspective when we discuss about security. We need to have a gender perspective in trade. We need to have a gender perspective in our consular affairs, for example. migration, and so on. This mainstreaming is really, really difficult. Now that I'm working, I used to be a scholar, now I am in the foreign policy side, I see how difficult is this coordination and to understand what really mainstreaming gender means. It's not just we will appoint a couple of women. It means we will have this vision in everything that we do when it comes to our foreign policy, because there are implications for the life of women in all the decisions that we take in foreign policy. And that's really actually is not something easy to do. Also, I concern about this institutionalization because sometimes what happens is we have a change of government and therefore the policies change. This is why it is crucial for us to have something that really remains within our bureaucracy. Because the problems that we face is that, and in particular when it comes to gender, sometimes there are changes in government and therefore in changes in policies. But when this remains in the realm of the institution, you know, we have at least the prospect of having something that will remain in the future. Resources, I always say that, and sometimes my ministry doesn't like it, but if you really want to indicate that this matters to you, we need further resources. We need resources within our ministries. We need resources that have a gender sensitive perspective and across the state, but in particular when dealing with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And now we need to increase our multilateral resources and resources to international institutions. So we are not going to change much just with words. We need also to add resources, and very critical to our list. There is the final, maybe one of the final things that I would like to say is that as a permanent representative of Chile, I haven't been here for that long. I have been here since June. And one of my really important concerns since I'm here is that I see that there is a lot of significant regression when it comes to the promotion and protection of women's rights and gender equality. This is something that is happening domestically and internationally. This is not only that is happening in countries in the developing world or in the global south, this is happening across the board. This is happening in the United States, this is happening in our region. So this is something a little bit more generalized. But of course, what happens domestically, it's also, you know, has a reflect internationally. So for example, today, during my time here in office, I have seen that really brutal discussions in different international organizations between countries that are more pro-gender and others that have a more conservative approach to this, and that they want to, in many cases, even bring the language backwards. This happens, as you know, critically in the Human Rights Council, in very important discussions, like, for example, about sexual orientation and gender identity. It has happened in other discussions, including, for example, issues related to gender mutilation, which actually had a more, in my view, a more regressive vocabulary than the previous one. So it's something that we really need to pay attention to. Not only to pay attention, I think we need to work very closely with civil society organizations and with other states to have a coordinated approach in terms of how are we going to reply to this? How are we, countries that have somehow like a like-minded vision in terms of promoting gender equality, need to now put their hands together to work and in a very systematic way in order to defend what we have so far, defend the norms that we have created, defend the international institutions that are based on non-discrimination and equality. And this is, and I think I say that in every different forums that I've been, because it's a real concern. So yes, we will continue discussing about gender parity. We will foster that, but we need also to defend what we have, because this is at the point that we are at this day. So I think that's something that I wanted to convey this morning. Finally, say that once again, the Chilean government is really committed to this. We are working on our feminist foreign policy. Hopefully we will launch it very soon. We, as a sign actually of the government in terms of this is about gender representation. So before this government, we have 12% of women ambassadors. Now, since the new government started, now we are closely to 24 to 25%, which means, and this is the reason why I'm here today as an ambassador in Geneva, apart from my qualifications, of course, but it's because there has been a decision from the government to appoint women of positions of power internationally. And I think this is something that should be also taken, seen by other governments in my region and in other regions in order to actually follow that path. So let me just end with this and thank you so much.
Thank you for that. Really interesting. I give the floor now to Santiago Canton, and who is the incoming Secretary General of the International Commission on Youth. Right. So thank you a lot for joining us. And we move now to another topic because we will focus a little bit more on the administration of justice now, because it's also another topic that we found very important. One of these areas also where decision-making spaces really don't see a high-level number of women, in particular in high-level courts or within specific judicial mandates. And so I would like to ask you from the perspective of the ICJ, an organization that has really a long-standing work on the promotion of the rule of law and access to justice. If you could comment on the key challenges, priority, and also recommendation that you see as really very important for the CEDAW future general recommendation for achieving gender parity also in judicial bodies. So thank you a lot.
Thank you very much, and thank you all the organizers for the invitation. I'll start as Secretary General of the ICJ next week, so I'm not an expert on the ICJ work. I want to start saying that, but I do have some specific recommendations based on the work of the ICJ of the last several years. Let me first start by saying that I think it was around 10, 11 years, correct me, Claudia, if I'm wrong. I was asked by Viviana Kristisevic, who is one of the other founders, together with Claudia of GIGWAL, to have a coffee in the Point Circle in Washington, D.C. And I sat down with her, and she told me the great idea she had. And the idea was GIGWAL. And she wanted to advance that idea, and she was looking for funding to do it, and so on. That was probably 2012 or 2011. 10 years later, GIGWAL has done an incredible job. And really has transformed many things. So congratulations to Claudia and to all the people working from GIGWAL, because it really has made a change at the international level in a way. Now, secondly, let me start with the obvious. Unfortunately, sometimes we have to repeat the same thing over and over and over and over again because the message doesn't reach the people we want to reach. The obvious is discrimination against women is the worst human rights violation. And I want to say it's the worst human rights violation. It's not among the worst human rights violations, which is what usually you can say. And it is the worst human rights violation because it happens directly to 50% of the world population. It happens indirectly to all the world population. It happens every day, every second, in every country. It's systematic, and it affects many aspects of all the aspects of society. It affects education, it affects politics, it affects business, it affects the economy, and of course, it affects directly women in the workforce. So it is by far the worst human rights violation, and it has happened for the last decades, for the last centuries, and for the last millenniums. So it's not, it's just unthinkable when you compare human rights violation with discrimination against women and all the consequences. It is clear, at least I think for me, the worst human rights violation. So the advances of the last, I would say, 2 or 3 decades on this issue has been incredible. As I was saying, thinking about the different treaty bodies for 20, 30 years ago compared with the treaty bodies today, or the different special mechanisms compared to today. The difference is incredible at the international level, and that happens also in many countries throughout the world. But still, 2 decades is the blink of an eye if you compare with centuries and millenniums of violation. So by no means we are close to finding a solution. On the contrary, the way to go is still longer than we know. What has been my experience, specifically in the inter-American systems, working on these issues or human rights in general? And I think it is specifically on the issue of recommendation for CEDAW. The best way to implement international human rights standards internally in the countries is when you combine international bodies, whether it's the UN or regional bodies, international standards, local civil society, and international organizations, right? And government, sorry. When you are able to combine all these 3 or 4 things together, you can get results. Right? And in the inter-American system for decades, we were trying to find ways to implement international human rights standards, and it's always difficult. And if you look at compliance in all the regional systems, you still are at the UN level as well. Compliance is always the main problem when we go to human rights. But what was the way, in my view, in which it was better to implement the international standards? It was through the judiciary. When you look back at the 80s or 90s in Latin America, it was impossible, completely impossible, to find a legal decision by a judge based on international human rights law. It was impossible. And I did some research. Today, in some countries, it's impossible to find a decision without quoting international human rights law. And that was done through the judicial system. So it is critical, whatever recommendations come out of CEDAW, it is critical to incorporate the importance that legal systems and judiciaries in all countries throughout the world can have in ensuring advancement in protection of rights of people. Let me briefly now, and that's exactly what the ICJ has been doing on different programs, particularly in Asia and the Pacific. And the ICJ put together early last year in May 2022 what is called the Bangkok Guidelines, which probably many of you know about it. I didn't until recently. I have not read, but and they're specifically towards the judiciary. And I would read some of them, if I may, because I think it becomes clear why the judicial is important. Just briefly. Developing a gender-sensitive and gender-responsive judicial system means not only including gender considerations in rules for adjudication of cases and mediation, but more generally in the administration of justice. The principle should extend even after the conclusion of the case, particularly in ensuring the full implementation of the judgment, which is usually a big problem. Gender equality should be a principle that guides judicial appointments, which is what we're talking about. There must be gender parity on the bench, as women judges bring a diversity of perspectives, approaches, and life experiences to adjudication, which influence the interpretation and application of laws. To that end, legislative, administrative, and judicial authorities responsible for judicial appointments and promotion should move expeditiously and progressively to achieve gender parity. And of course, the other one, which is, it happens again everywhere, women judges should not be assigned exclusively to cases involving family law and sexual violence, which is normally the case. Affirmative measures like quotas, which may be imposed along with other requirements, such as integrity and competence, should be implemented in order to attain gender parity in the judiciary. Evaluation procedures for the appointment and promotion of judges should be merit-based and considered with a gender perspective to avoid rules and situations that might place women at a disadvantage in judicial appointments and promotions. Judicial training, which was also something mentioned, judicial training institutions should include courses on gender mainstreaming in the curriculum. The judicial training institution should be involved in the training of all stakeholders in the judicial process, including the police, prosecutors, and lawyers. Another one that was also mentioned by the ambassador, and with this one I finished, gender disaggregated data collection pertaining to issues relating to women must be periodically collected on the cases that are brought before each individual court. And I cannot re-emphasize how important is data collection for the advancement of human rights. If we don't have hard data, it's impossible to know if at the government level, it's impossible to know if you are doing the right thing or not. It's walking in the dark, which is what usually happens. I mean, I got that experience in government, and data was non-existent basically in this issue. Let me finish with something that also I always, probably Claudia heard many times referring to this. It's one of the most important cases in the Inter-American system regarding violence against women was the cotton field case, the Campo Gobernero, which is a case against the government of Mexico. And it was, I believe, correct me, Claudia, I think it was drafted by Cecilia Medina, a Chilean lawyer. Made enormous contributions both at the UN level and the Inter-American system. And she said in that, particularly in the reparation part, something that changed completely entirely what was the decisions of the Inter-American Court before that decision, which was, you know, in law or judges, when it comes to reparation, they always think about restitution in interim, which is, you know, bringing the situation to the way it was before the violation. And of course, when it comes to violence against women, as to discrimination against women, to bringing the situation to the way it was before is to bringing the situation to the bad situation it was before. So basically, said we cannot do restitution in interim anymore when it comes to violence against women. We have to have, in Spanish, she said, we should have a vocación transformadora, a transforming will to change reality. And that's what is needed in the case of discrimination against women, in the case of implementation of international law into national legislation and judicial systems. So with that, thank you very much.
Thank you a lot. Really super interesting. So I move now to introduce our panelists. So Kathleen, who is, I'm really pleased to introduce her because she the founder of a very important organization, Women at the Table. This was the first organization to focus on system change by really supporting women to gain influence in specific area that are overlooked as economy, democracy, governance, but mostly I think it's we discussed already today in technology in particular is super important. But also I'm very happy to say that she's one of the 3 co-founders of International Gender Champion. Is super important also leadership network of female and male decision making that really try to break down gender violence process and changes. So super happy to have you with us today. And I will ask you to share really your extensive experience in this field and to try to also think a little bit about how the position and also the awareness of women has changed, in particular in the last 10 years in your respective research field of art and your field of action. And if maybe you can say something about how you and your organization plan to contribute to the general recommendation, because you will have a key role, I'm sure about that. So I give you the floor. Thank you a lot.
Excuse me, could you pass the microphone over to Kathleen, please? Just the microphone in front of you, if you just pass that on. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for that very gracious introduction. And it's so wonderful to be here together with you and with such amazing panelists. So I'm chuffed to be here as well. So you had just said that Women at the Table uses the gears of power in a way to try and propel feminist systems change. And we're focused on, as you said, democracy, sustainability, the economy, and technology. So there are so many things that I'd like to sort of react to here, and I'm hoping that one of the things will kind of tie some of the conversation together. So using this prism of, or these gears of change, we've created a tool called the Gender Gap app, also known as the GAP. And we ideated that with several international organizations, primarily with IPU, who's been with us from the very first day, but UN Women, WIPO, WMO, IUCN, actually, who's a main driver before they all moved to UN Environment. And it does a bunch of things. It uses technology to look at women's representation, but then their participation, and then their influence in international organizations. So what does that mean? So the representation would be just the numbers of bodies of male, female, or X actually, which we measure for, but since nobody identifies in these international groups, it really comes out only as male, female, but how many men and women are there? And we've been counting men and women for a very long time, 5 or 10 years in international organizations, and actually having the data hasn't changed yet. So we decided to go from the numbers of women, and basically we're looking at these bodies, and it's 60-40, it's not bad. But then we start to measure international participation. So how much are the women speaking? We're also looking at are they from the government? Are they from civil society? Where are they from? And what level of authority they have, right? Are they the head of the delegation? Or are they speaking from the floor? So we look at that and we start to see that even though it would be 60-40 in many cases, men are speaking 80% to women's 20%. So right there, men are taking much more. And the COP has started, UNFCCC has started to also do these actually by hand. They do the calculations. We're trying to help them with this technical tool. But we're just seeing that men just speak more, even though they might be there in equal numbers. So and longer. So that's just absolutely across the board. That's the way that it works. Then the next thing we're trying to look at is the idea of influence. So who, again, as I said, are they the head of the delegation? Where are they speaking from? But also, what are they speaking about? Are women only speaking, it's been mentioned here, are they only speaking about gender, about health, about children? Are they talking about finance and climate finance and technology and really cybersecurity and these very big issues? So even when women do get to be in the room and then they do get a chance to speak and they speak less, what they're speaking about tends to be very gendered itself. And that's also very problematic because it is not only the purview of women to speak about gender issues, because we need more men to be speaking about them as well, but it's also the purview of women to opine on every important issue in the world. And we tend to, for some reason, we think that men can be experts in everything, but somehow women are only experts in talking about their lived experience. So, so we have this tool. We're about ready to, we're going with IPU to CSW. And we're going to be sort of revealing it and hoping that certain, that parliaments will use it. We're hoping that international organizations will use it. And we really need some help sort of spreading this through because it's ready to go. And I think that once people see the data, we've seen with WMO, it's very, very powerful. And people just go, oh my goodness, we didn't even realize. We didn't see it. You don't see what you don't know. And that we hope then can change and help strengthen all sorts of processes and bring all sorts of people into the room, women, but all marginalized groups, because you can also use this tool to figure indigenous speakers. You can really use it. The COP asked us to add age as an identifier, which we have as an ability. So you can see when you start looking at the COP data and you see who over 60 gets to speak as the head of a delegation and who under 30 is the head of a delegation, it's like 90% to 0%. And you see that and you go, okay, there's something wrong here. We don't want to have a system that does that. I don't think any of us do. It's just some sort of the default. So that's number one. We started to make these kind of apps and technology. We've been focused, and it uses AI and an explainable algorithm, which we also feel is very important that you understand how these tools actually come to the conclusions that they're coming to. And that brings me to a second thing of the focus of our work, and something that we briefed CEDAW on, we'd love to come back and talk about, is about AI bias and how these very simple tools are so unaccountable and are enshrining gender bias, racial bias, really into all the systems of the future. So we run the A+ Alliance for Inclusive Algorithms that works on that. I'm going to give you two recent examples. We have a group that through the Feminist AI Research Network, which we also run, we have, and I just want to say that there's one thing that's drawn from a paper. We just finished a prototype and it's about to pilot. It's about transforming, it's our first pilot, transforming the judiciary in Argentina. It's Via Libre. And that actually just looks at, we're working with a very, very forward-thinking criminal court judge, a male in Buenos Aires, who's taking all of his gender violence data. He's, for a long time, has put it on open because he wants to sort of air the judiciary out. But this is actually taking it and automating it so that ultimately, when there is enough data, it will begin to see patterns in intimate partner violence, basis, public space violence. Where is femininicide coming from, particularly in the region? So you really can begin to see patterns in all that way. And the pilot will be going through all 10 criminal courts in Buenos Aires. So there's a kind of tool things that we're trying to make. But another prototype that we're working on, also from Latin America, because there's incredible work happening, Data Genero. Actually, I'm so sorry. Data Genero is doing the Argentina project, and Via Libre did the other one. So sorry, guys, because I'm sure I'll get feedback if anybody's watching. But they did a really incredible work on natural language processing. So basically, it's translation systems. And what happens when you translate the English language system that also often has suppressed the really bad stuff for America, but hasn't wound up suppressing the bad stuff in other languages, because the way a neural network works, a neural network can't forget what it has learned, right? At all. So all you can do is kind of try and trick it into not showing you the very hideous biases, racial biases, gender biases that it's learned. So here in Latin American Spanish, they looked at it and somebody just was doing a chatbot. They were working with a medical provider. And so you have gordo, gorda, feo, fea. So it's beautiful, gendered, and it's also fat. And so the men who came up with, who were going to the chatbot because they were overweight, they got a recommendation to go to see a nutritionist. So far, so good. That's good. The women who just using the system, who were asked, said that they were overweight, were sent to a plastic surgeon. So, but you start to see that these are stereotypes, but they're built into the system, but they have these extraordinary and almost tragic ramifications. And we see this playing out with race. We see this playing out with all sorts of feminine stereotypes. We also see proxies in the language. So that if you have non-gendered language, right, that are neutral, and you see all of a sudden it just Google auto translates, it's Hungarian, it's in Turkish, you know, he is hardworking, she is lazy, you know, he is having this most insane kind of combinations. I mean, he is a doctor, she's a nurse, we sort of kind of understand, but this is, you know, he is charming, she is, you know, dull. So it's kind of the kind of revelations that we're seeing now from ChatGPT, really, is in terms of what is really embedded in those language systems from scraping from the internet. So this notion that we have that technology is neutral, technology is by its very nature fair and somehow without human bias is something that we have to just really just get out there and combat immediately. This notion that technology making, tool making is the domain of males is also something that's just should not be, because tools are power. So we often say, we quote Marshall McLuhan, who said, we shape our tools and thereafter our tools shape us. So even in the history of tool making, when we have the plow that was made that uses upper body strength, that meant that the power on the farm was to the people who could push the plows. Women don't have upper body strength, but had it been invented for hip strength, women could just sort of walk around and carry a baby and a conversation and would have been able to be in control of the means of production. So this is, for me, about power and going forward in the next century or two. And I seem to be on a roll, so I'll stop. Just there.
Thanks a lot. I'm extremely sorry that we are coming to an end of our panel. It has been so interesting. So we could continue, I think, again, but now I really need to close. And we collected a few questions from also from our online participants. I suggested that maybe I give the floor to each of our panelists, and I will ask you to just to conclude, to say a few additional words on what maybe key messages or advice you would like to share for the future development of the general recommendation. And I share also the two questions we received. So if you want to address also the two questions by closing your talk. So the first one is if you would like also to include or to address how the situation in Afghanistan could be addressed by the CEDAW and also in particular by the general recommendation. And the second question concerns the fact that if gender parity in the judiciary, in particular in the bench, will be also included in the general recommendation. So I give you the floor to end our super nice panel. Thank you. Well, I think we can use it.
Thank you very much. I have a lot of notes because it was the first very interesting meeting in our work. Thank you a lot, and it's a demonstration that we need everybody to have the right way. And thank you, Madam Ambassador, because I know that your country was ready to register to integrate parity in the constitution.
Yes.
And it's a big step. We did it in France, and it has been the first step for really big progress. Thank you very much, because I know what we can really take into consideration. The question of data, marginalized groups, of course, but the question of accountability and evaluation also, because it's a big issue. We use during our constructive dialogues to ask the state party how many judges are women, how they are appointed, the question of training regarding international conventions, because for lawyers, but for judges too. So we are already in this part of the job, but we have probably to reinforce, and your contribution will be very interesting. I note also the question of institutionalization, and it's very important, but we need a new narrative. And I think that really we need, as I said, new concepts, because we have really to reshape the vision of governance. And I think that during the next weeks, I have to say that during a large part of the year, we will organize experts meetings. So we are ready to look with you and how to go a little bit deeper in this vision. Secondly, we will adopt a first draft at the end of the year. And after that, we'll organize very big regional conferences. And so it's a long process. It's very inclusive process. And I think that the process is probably a part of the success, because we have a group of leaders, state leaders. We have civil society, we have institutions, and thank you again, because academic institutions are very important for us. And we have also, of course, NGOs as women at the table. We know you perfectly, and I propose you to be close to us, because it is mobilization that we can push. And I count on you once again. About Afghanistan, it's true that it is a tragedy. which is part of our reflection because it's demonstrations that women's rights are not consolidated enough. And it's a special case, of course, but in some other countries, we see this sort of pushback. And we have really to change this evolution, random evolution, or sometimes tragic. And on the other case, question, I can assure that we will reinforce our vision about judiciary, but also international appointments. And as you said, it not only representation, but I would like to maybe to change the title of the general recommendation, because it's true that representation is not enough for me too. But please, the floor is open.
Well, thank you very much. I think it's, again, I want to thank the opportunity to be here for the G4 campaign. It's an amazing opportunity. We believe, and somewhat to tie some of the things that have been discussed, I think we feel very happy that we inspire somewhat the debate. At least in Latin America, we have been working with groups that claim gender parity at the domestic sphere with composition of high courts, and we have been supporting. I was part of a mission to observe the selection of the Supreme Court of Honduras very recently, and they were able to ensure gender parity in the new composition of the court. That was something that I was very happy to contribute to. I think it's also very important that as part of the feminist policy, foreign policy, you include nominations of women to, but as a rule. And again, with considerations of, not that we have seen a lot of aspirations, but sometimes aspirations don't materialize, or if they do, there's a lot of backlash, as you say. We work towards having gender parity in one organ, but then for the next cycle, instead of having more women, we have more men, so whatever was achieved goes back to, not having gender parity. So I think that it has to be some formal process, and I think it contributes to your notion of institutionalization. I think there needs to be institutionalized domestic transparent proceedings for nominating women candidates with taking gender into account, and also at the international level. I think that Geneva is a fantastic place to have this debate, since you participate in the nomination of and the selection of candidates for different international bodies. And final thing, Nicole, we are here for the long run. We have told you that we will be contributing to the full process, and we hope that by the end of the process we have an amazing configuration of rights and practical rights. Thank you very much.
Just very briefly say something. And it's the presentation by Caitlin. Remind me of something that happened in the Inter-American system a couple of decades ago. Argentina back in the 90s was probably one of the first countries in Latin America, with the exception of Cuba and probably Mexico. I'm not so sure about Mexico, that had quota laws in the Congress. And Argentina passed a law, probably was 1993 or 4. And it was not 50-50, it was 1/3 and 2/3, right? So what immediately happened, which Caitlin was saying about how at the end of the day you put everything in place, but the system, the system controlled by men makes it again against women. I mean, that doesn't matter what you do. At the end of the day, you can have 50% of women, but if they don't talk, So what happened in Argentina was that immediately after they approved the law, the 1/3 at the bottom were always women, and the 2/3 were always men, automatically. So it was the day, that immediately that happened. So what they had to do, and they did it in Argentina a decade later, probably, was to have a 50-50, first of all, 50-50 law, and secondly, they had to be 1 and 1 and 1 and 1 in every list, which is more or less the standard right now. But we have to be extremely alert because what Caitlin mentioned that is happening, it will continue to happen.
Yes.
Constant, non-stop. So it is critical to have
Yes,
very
yes.
clear goals and standards and make sure that.
Yes, let me just finish briefly saying once again why women representation and gender parity it's important. I think there is the issue of legitimacy, which I think we always need to stress when dealing with this. Our institutions will be more legitimate if it's actually we have institutions that are 50 and 50% because they will basically reflect, you know, the composition of our society. So there is that argument. And then there is the argument of efficiency. I think they will also be more efficient institutions. So if we've had institutions dealing with policies that directly affect women, which are most of the policies that we discuss anyway, women have to be sitting on the table. And therefore, the policies that will be implemented or created will be probably, I would say, most likely to be way more efficient than ones, you know, that are written and discussed without women in the table, and that will have effect on our life. So representations means also institutions that are more efficient. And finally, I think it's important to have women, and this is something that I have experienced here in Geneva, because women in positions of power open also the path for other women. And I think that's critical. So the more women that we appoint, that means more women will come in the future. It also means more women will be better trained, more women will be better mentored. And therefore we will create a network of women to support each other and to foster their careers as well. So there are really many good reasons that we can claim to foster gender parity and representation.
I'm just going to say on an end note, I'm going to vigorously support Nicole's openness to potentially changing the general recommendations title to equal and inclusive representation, participation, and influence of women in decision making.
Women at the table could be a good title.
Thank you a lot. So I think I would like to express my respect to everybody, also to our participants from home. And so, yeah, we need to close. It's time to end. So thank you again.
Thank you.